What is up, you guys? Welcome back to Twink Revolution. I'm Sam.
And I'm Gian. And we're joined with a very special guest whose book I actually just finished this morning. We're joined by Catherine Liu, who's a professor of film and media studies at UC Irvine and the author of just a fantastic new book called Virtue Hoarders, The Case Against the Professional Managerial Class. Catherine, welcome to Twink Revolution.
Thank you. So glad you did the reading. You get an A.
Oh no, it was an incredible read, and just let me start the show by saying I cannot tell people strongly enough, go out and read this.
Thank you.
It's a quick read. It's it's a tight little 80 pages. It's like in the tradition of good leftist pamphleteering.
Yeah.
And no, it was great. Even with my busy schedule where I don't read as much as I should, and I wish I did, I got through it and I enjoyed it. So, wanted to ask a little bit about, off the bat, like your book is dealing with the PMC. So
Nice.
It's a term that's so loaded and people like to get worked up about. But to you, I mean, who are the PMC? Is this the people that, the Marxists have called the labor aristocracy? Are they the petty bourgeois? Who are they?
Right. I don't know why people get so worked about it. Only some people do, I have to say. People who really, in the end, don't want to talk about class, want to talk about every other identity but class, and want to talk about difference and not contradiction. So I want us to remember that class is a site of contradiction. It's not like I'm just different from you or you're different from me. Class standing pits one group of people, a minority of people, against the majority of people. And so when the Ehrenreichs first wrote their book, or their piece about the PMC, a lot of Marxists said, it's just the petty bourgeoisie. There's no new class. You guys can't invent a new class in your work because it wasn't a class that existed in Marx. But it actually is a class, an intermediate class that did exist throughout, I would say, all of recorded history. It's the literate people. So clerics and priests might have been in that class underneath the monarchy and the military, to think about it under feudalism, right? But in the United States, the professional managerial class I define as people who have college degrees and do jobs that require college degrees or a professional credential that only an institution of higher learning can grant you. And as we know, in the United States, institutions of higher learning are now increasingly hard to get into and increasingly expensive. So we have a generation of aspirational PMC young people who are burdened by basically unpayable amounts of debt. Because this class, in the beginning of the 20th century, occupied maybe 3% of the major workforce. They were lawyers, doctors, there weren't that many of them. College-educated people made up a much smaller proportion of the American population. And there were a lot of more authentically petit bourgeois people who were neither capitalist nor working class. They were small farmers. They were small shopkeepers, small business owners. This mythical person who capitalism has completely trampled. So that small shopkeeper no longer exists because you've got Target and Walmart outside of your town. That small farmer who's supposed to represent these authentic American values no longer exists because Archer Daniels Midland just bought his farm and he's just renting the land back from them and he can only plant GMO corn or, so Dow Chemicals indebted him to them because of petrochemical fertilizer, and they no longer own their farms, and so they only they only raise pigs that these giant corporations sell them and then buy them back to them from. So there's no that segment of the small business class that Marx actually kind of despised. He thought, they were an intermediate class. I think I come from that class. I have a lot of that in my family, working class and petit bourgeois in my family. They are more and more eclipsed by this white-collar working class elite, which is now more and more stratified because on the top you have corporate lawyers, financial advisors, on the bottom you have nurses, school teachers, but these are all people who need college degrees. And I also think, I joked about this with the Scottish potters, and they were just laughing at me, but I was like, PMC people work in air conditioning. They're like, well, have you ever been to Scotland? There's no need for air conditioning. But let's just say that PMC people do not work with their bodies. They do not damage themselves physically because of work. Now, they do damage themselves physically ergonomically, like not sitting correctly in a chair. And I also think they damage themselves psychologically and intellectually. But you don't get a herniated disc from being a high-powered lawyer. You don't get tendinitis of all your knees and joints by being a K Street lobbyist. Right. You don't get those illnesses or those afflictions by being a college professor either. So, is that good enough of a definition?
Yeah, no, that's. I mean, well, I think it's exactly as you said. I mean, people who perhaps are very busily trying to split hairs or to avoid talking about class will start sort of carving out and being like, yes, but look, this PMC person, like, or I'm indebted with a lot of college debt and therefore I couldn't possibly constitute part of this class. And yet the values of this class are unmistakable, and they seem to be, even though there's a lot of intra-class competition, it's sort of, they still seem to manage to behave as a class in imposing a sort of monolithic value system. And so do you think people are being disingenuous when they pretend they don't know who you're talking about?
I haven't actually delved deeply into the comments of my antagonists because it's too stressful and I have too much other work. But I think like the libertarian communists and then the leftists who are really into the Democratic Party, like Doug Henwood, who unleashed a Twitter mob on me like 3 weeks ago, they say things like the class doesn't exist. It's not important.
Doug, it's the you, Doug. Doug, if you're listening, it's you.
Yeah, but the dumber members of the Twitter mob said, actually, she's a professor. She's pretending to be poor. And I feel like that actually goes a lot. That actually is a perfectly well addressed. If I had known of Rivers' article on standpoint bureaucracy, I would have cited that, because it's like that is how atrophied our critical elements are, where we think that you have to have that standpoint, and that immediately gives you a critical apparatus to deal with whatever you think of as politics. Like, I can only speak as an Asian American woman, like hashtag stop Asian hate. I actually kind of hate that hashtag, but that's another story. So that denial, I think, is really like a fascinating, and the standpoint bureaucracy thing is like a fascinating affliction of how what Ehrenreich's predicted really happened, which is that the PMC's values completely dominated the left, have completely taken over the American left. And they were really like puzzled by this in 1977. They were like, okay, so all of these college-educated people who are both professionals and managers are taking over all, like what AOC calls organizing spaces left. The working class, which had originally been the impetus at the turn of the 20th century, like 1899 to 2000, there was incredible amounts of labor unrest, right? So if you look at like the history of the left in the United States, the American Socialist Party and Eugene Debs represented an incredible amount of agitation and spirit of revolt and against capitalism. And so then Ehrenreich said, but after 1968, the working class is completely eclipsed within left movements. And part of it had to do with what they diagnosed, but they didn't, I feel like actually didn't go far enough, is actually the cultural vanguardism and the ideological aggression of this class to suppress any form of critique or revolt or dissent that they didn't control through their means of ideological reproduction.
Yeah, that kind of leads perfectly into my next question. So basically in your book, you talk about how after 1968, the PMC class shifts sides. It kind of leaves the workers on its economic redistribution, centralism, planning, kind of advocacy, and goes to the side of the capitalist classes that they expand as a party. Like, what do you think made the turning point of them switching sides with the workers and joining the side of the capitalist class?
There are a couple of things that, a couple of factors that could explain this turn. One of which is capital's own loss of profit taking in the late 70s, and its drive to find profits in by attacking the working class, because the redistribution from the top down was really profound after 1945, and because people were afraid of the American Communist Party and people were afraid of the USSR, and so there was a lot of pressure to redistribute from the top down because people were afraid of this bubbling up of popular discontent. But so capital began, first of all, to attack labor. It began a process of deindustrialization that needed managers to preside over the offshoring of American labor. And I think that, I don't want to sound too conspiratorial, but why not? Like, capital also decided that it was really good to reward a tranche of people to execute its plans to extract more profit from labor, to stagnate wages. And so this class's rewards got much more profound after the 70s. Like the gap between a college attendee or even an elite college attendee's salary and a high school graduate salary was started to become polarized. And there were just so many rewards that came in to fill this space. So that's one, sort of diabolical set of factors where capital's own profit taking is stagnating, and it needs more sycophants and sort of minions to execute its basic dismantling of a social welfare state. And the Vietnam War could be thought of as a really great way in which a divide was created because the draft immediately drafted people who did not go to college, right? You immediately got a very high or low number. I forgot about the lottery. But if you went to college, you were absolved of going to Vietnam, but you could oppose the war. And so the left-wing or counterculturalist anti-war types imagined that the working class were sort of raw war types. But studies have been done since that period of time, and it shows that the American working class was more opposed to the war than upper middle class people whose sons did not have to go to that war and who could enjoy their country club lifestyle. And at that point, the sort of upper middle class was still much more dominated by Republicans, and they were much more pro-war. And they were the country club pro-war people. And that, in fact, the working class sort of was vulnerable to the losses enjoyed by that war. But somehow the way that, I also think the anti-war movement and the way that it construed oppositionality and antagonism was about sort of leaving the working class behind. So the working class from that point on, with regard to the women's movement, the civil rights movement, thought of itself as, the working class didn't have agency at this point in the minds of the PMC. They thought they were leaving, the working class behind because these people were homophobic, they were racist, they were misogynist, they were pro-war, all of those qualities, these reactionary qualities, rather than really attacking their adversaries, which should have been capital, focusing on capitalists, focusing on those Republican right-wing pro-war types. Sort of Nixon shot himself in the foot. He kind of, the Republican Party looked like it was going down. So there was no effort, really, because there was still a robust centrism where there were sort of progressive Republicans who were sort of appalled by Nixon's behavior as well. But I just feel like there was this kind of giving away of giving all of reactionary politics to the working class rather than to the real class antagonist at that point. And I also feel like what's lost in all of this is the actual importance of working class gay liberation, for instance, working class African American agitation, working class feminism. All of that gets taken away, and then you have this like very smooth idea of how the PMC absorbs all of the movement, the civil rights movements and the social movements, and it takes them into universities. There's a really, really good book by Christine Hanhart called Safe Spaces, and it's about the gentrification of Christopher Street. It's about what happened after Stonewall. So all of the so Stonewall is like, all the queer men fighting the cops. We all know that story. But what what Hanhart shows is that after that point, the gay community in Greenwich Village worked with the police and real estate interests to gentrify Christopher Street, because what they wanted to do was also like get the drugs out, get the prostitutes out. And the making of Greenwich Village as a kind of gay enclave is the making of Greenwich Village as an upper middle class gay enclave, because Stonewall and that whole area was much more mixed, much more racially and class mixed. But after the sort of gentrification and after the sort of the movement, it became a very friendly to upper middle class white gay men area. So I feel like that's a part of the civil rights movement. That's part of the gay rights movement. That's very little like focused on. Whenever my friends wanted, or my colleagues want to do like queer history and stuff like that, I'm like, why don't we invite Christine Hanhart? Yeah. Let's talk about Stonewall, and let's talk about the gentrification of the West Village. And they're like, oh yeah.
not quite as rosy.
It's like no one. It's just not sexy. Like it just doesn't tell the story they want to hear. So whatever.
Well, I mean, I don't think there's anything conspiratorial to say that like the approach taken by Capital through the earlier parts of the 20th century, of sending in Pinkertons and just getting cops to shoot people, clearly was radicalizing the working class. And there's almost like if there's something just diabolical and genius about the strategy of, screw it, let's build a different left. Let's build a new left, as it were, the one that is structurally ineffective, but will channel all of that enthusiasm back into the interests of capital, and then having these stewards of it who will welcome anybody who's just willing to act as a shepherd for that kind of enthusiasm back into this just dead end project. I mean, if like, honestly, kudos to this simple banal evil of it all. It's because nothing else would have worked.
No, absolutely. That's the other thing about like the PMC pseudo left, is that they don't respect their adversaries enough. They just don't respect the enemy enough. Like, that enemy is really powerful. Capitalism is incredibly complex. Pronouns are not going to liberate you from any form of oppression or exploitation possible. And the whole interlocking system of the military-industrial complex and capital, you know what I'm talking about, that somehow they don't care. That's what I often think. They don't have enough respect for the game or respect for the struggle to actually sit down and say, like, what should be our priorities, or what is solidarity, or what do I actually love about politics. I was actually thinking about this, which was very this is like really old-fashioned and terrible of me.
We're into that.
Okay, so I was reading Phil Broth's "I Married a Communist," and I grew up going back and forth between the People's Republic of China and here, because my father was at the UN, and we'd go to China every 2 years. And I was thinking about like a lot of left-wing propaganda at the time from the communist parties, totally flawed, was about loving the people, right? Loving the working class, giving them dignity, like learning from them. And you never hear that now. I mean, you guys know what I'm talking about, though. What we don't love precisely is the working class or ordinary people or normal people's struggle. We love things that are really bizarre, and only two people know about them. We fetishize these kind of marginal identities or marginal life forms that, in the end are very, very deeply reified, forms of difference. But there is no love for for ordinary people. Like, ordinary people are really scary. Ordinary people are or we have to treat them with such kid gloves that they don't want to be around us, because in every left movement I've ever been in, this has been a long time now, there's always a point at a meeting where people go, there are just not enough women of color, or there are not enough working class people here. How can we make them feel comfortable? I was like, you know what? Having this conversation is exactly what's keeping them away. Like, okay, let's go down that rabbit hole, because nobody wants to hear that. Nobody, like, what's the matter? How can we make this more welcoming? And I was like, okay, well, if you want working class people to join you in some way, first of all, provide some childcare and food. It's actually really simple.
Right. Yeah. I mean, well, I guess I want to ask a little bit about sort of one of the manifestations of the PMC that you speak with such venom for. I feel like you do such an excellent job of sort of channeling the inchoate rage I feel for sort of PMC values every moment, particularly when you talk about academia. And academia is sort of the home and the safe space for the PMC.
Let's say it's the laboratory for its newest identity category as well. Yeah.
Well, I mean, thinking a little bit about sort of universities as a space that were once, a bastion of, however misguided radicalism, but at least radicalism and free expression and dangerous ideas. Now they're just, ideological orthodoxy. It seems like hell. I mean, I graduated from PMC college, quite a few years ago now. So it just seems to have gotten worse and worse. I mean, what's going on, and what has happened there? How did that change come about?
So one of the things I should say is that there's, I teach at a large public university, and it's still very possible to do what you want in your classrooms. And my students are not like little hothouse orchids who are going to fade at a touch, and they're much more, normie. So I should say that, and we have a good time. But in general, in administrative circles, or when, we have to be collegial, or what, in reinventing the university mission, or thinking about, once you get interacting in that, like, administrative space, it's really scary. And one of the things that I thought academia and intellectual life would provide me, because I came from a family of very uneducated people, was the general air of skepticism and the willingness to be persuaded, and a kind of open-mindedness that also was able to stake itself on argumentative reason, so that if I disagreed with you, I could engage with you robustly in some kind of Socratic dialogue. Like, those were my illusions about how educated people behaved. And I wasn't completely wrong. Like, there were lots of New York intellectuals, and there were examples of people like writing in books about things like this, where you have this kind of general air of liberal skepticism and open-mindedness. And I feel like that is just gone. That is just gone, because there's a fear, and there's an ideological fear. That comes out of a great deal of liberal guilt. And so one of the things that the George Floyd incident really galvanized was this awareness of how few African-American professors and students there were in, especially in PhD programs and in the university. And so what the university's solution to this is to create an office of inclusion and equity, to then start surveilling every single search, so that we can, be more inclusive and excellent. There's nothing wrong with that inherently, but there's so little real discussion about what our goals are, how we are actually trying to open up the university to people who are people of color or working class people, and that conformity creates there's a lot of fear. There's fear and guilt. So here's the other thing about the PMC. They operate by fear and guilt. So if you meet someone who's like trying to make you feel afraid and guilty, just think about like who they are for a moment, and just be like, okay, wait a minute, what are the values here? Because there's not an honest engagement. It's always about manipulating people with regard to fear and guilt, because I think the liberal agenda has really collapsed. there is no justification for doing what we do with regard to the 5-alarm fire that is our social healthcare, that is our healthcare system, that is our educational system, that is our economic system. I mean, the ways in which capitalism has destroyed the planet, has destroyed the lives of the majority of people, should make you feel really afraid and guilty. But in the meantime, you're making a really good salary, you're working in air conditioning, you're pushing paper, you're doing your email job right now in the pandemic. You don't have to go out and expose yourself. So you feel really guilty, but your guilt turns into this cosmetic, weird punishment of other people rather than actually understanding what the basis of solidarity is. Because it is possible to quit this class in terms of its values, just no one wants to do it. I mean, I wanted to, this is an example I've talked about before, and just shows you what a bad door knocker I was for Bernie, because I knocked doors in my neighborhood. It's all professors, and just so many of them were into Elizabeth Warren because they're or they would say I'm studying the issues. I don't know. I'm really for Warren. Sanders is okay, and it's why?
Yeah.
Why don't you want universal health care? You have really good health care. Why don't you think this is something that should be for everyone? You know the university comes every year and says, we're paying so much more for your health care, we can't give you a raise. Well, guess what? If you have universal health care, they don't have that excuse anymore. So it's good for you, just in your interest, self-interest, and you're a professed liberal. This is something so simple to work towards, but they want to also appear smart. So they're just afraid of universalisms. And I would say, within the humanities and the social sciences, we've been guilty of attacking Enlightenment values or any kind of universalism, including universal programs. The people are just oh, universalism? Oh, well, that sounds bad. That sounds Eurocentric or oppressive. Or I'm not saying my science colleagues would say this, but they would be just I don't know, no one's ever done that before. That's national healthcare. It's God damn, look at Taiwan. Look at Australia. Look at the UK. If you don't want to go somewhere with people too far away from you, there are actually functioning national healthcare systems.
Right.
So that was a very I kind of lost my thread.
No, you did great. I wanted to ask kind of without asking you to say anything about your employer or your students or anything like that. I'm kind of curious. I mean, you are you're a straight talker. I noticed in the book you cite Michael Lind and Angela Nagel. Who else is in there?
Well, I actually trashed Gabriel Wynand. So
okay. Well, you see, that's how you get away. No, there's a few in there where I was
Frost, I think it's mentioned.
Oh yeah. Lash. I think talk about Lash. So. How's the response been, and how do you get away with it? Because I guess if we for those of us that are standing on the outside, we would, we get called Nazis for saying a lot less.
Right. Oh yeah, right. No, they've called me conservative. No, I'm very senior in my department. I really put my nose to the grindstone. I did my work. I also think people don't read each other. In my department, it's just oh, you've written that book, you've written that article, great. And if they do, then they're really mad at me. But there's one crazy person who's really mad at me because I actually try to behave like a professional when I'm at work. See, I used to have this crazy Marxist colleague, I'm not going to name him, at Minnesota, and he would think I'm doing politics by yelling at everyone in my department. So I don't do that anymore, but it really literally does kill me. The meetings really, really kill me. And yet, when I make arguments, then because I'm very senior, then they're all oh, okay. But the tendency is completely towards more and more identitarian protocols within the work. I mean, one of the things that I found very upsetting, and this is not something I have to be I think confidential about, is that they're more and more gearing us towards trauma, teaching traumatic students. We've been traumatized, teaching traumatized students. Sorry, we've all been traumatized, and the leaders of my department, they just take these administrative mandates on and then they pass them on to us, and there's no critical element at all. There's no like, maybe this isn't such a good idea, anything. But so part of it is actually being senior and then also behaving like a professional in my office and trying to be fair. I mean, there are all sorts of like other underhanded things that people can do that make me angry, but that's okay. But I feel like for younger people who want to criticize the PMC, it's much more dangerous for you guys. Totally 100% more dangerous. I mean, I was surprised when the Twitter mobs came on. They were like, I haven't read her book, but, you know, she's an idiot. She's a transphobe. Get her the fuck out of here. And that was kind of shocking, but the ignorance was so, like, completely preposterous. But I feel like when you are, you know, just emerging, when you're trying to make a name, when you're trying to work in, you know, content production or trying to, like, create an intellectual ground for political dissent, that, and you're in your 20s and 30s, that, like, you just put a target on your back, right? And there was a point when I was thinking, like, wow, how long is this book going to be out there before people start calling me this Tucker Carlson, right-wing reactionary? And it was about, 3 months. It took about 3 months. And in the department itself and in the school itself, I don't feel like anyone will say that to me directly. But one thing that keeps me going is I have enormous numbers of DMs, emails from people who are just like, I'm so enraged. Your book was so cathartic. Or, you're describing what I've been dealing with in my NGO, or I'm a first generation college professor. I don't know why I'm so mad, or I'm trying to organize people, and even my union types union people are like telling me to do this, or DSA, has become a place where the PMC exercises power, but I can't really say this, let me just tell you that this is what you describe is actually completely true. But they're terrified. They're terrified of coming out publicly and saying this. And well, they should be, because I feel like there's a kind of sadism there. And this goes back to your question, Jen. The PMC has given up on all of its liberal values of open-mindedness and the sort of high liberalism, and they only want to police and conform, exclude, cancel. They have it is a secular form of excommunication, cancellation. And their virtue is a secular form of virtue too. But they're very self-interested. That's the other thing, is that I'm not saying that working class people on the assembly line were always working in collective action. No, they're afraid too of losing their jobs. But Marx noted that something about being in a factory and depending on each other actually was a big mistake for capital, to bring all of these working class people into urban areas, to have them recognize and see each other rather than being on the farm and working piecemeal. That created the grounds for collective action. And I feel like the PMC person, of course, this is all I don't stand outside of this. The PMC person, though, works in a mode of pure self-interest. So there's like a lot of self-interest and fear that creates an inability for any of us to break through ideologically and have the political discussions that we should be having. Because in part, there are such powerful, moneyed, nonprofit, private foundation forces who are willing to reward you if you speak their language. So I think I tweeted this earlier, but speaking the language of class struggle will definitely not get you a job. And speaking the language of identity protocols may not get you a job, but you have a much higher chance of getting a job or a grant.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking also in the academia sphere, there seems to be this kind of cycle of the liberal, or I should say the illiberal, former liberals have kind of pushed this narrow agenda more and more. Like I was in college, I think 8 years ago. I don't know. I can't even keep track anymore. Kind of during the height of the free speech wars, the Milo Yiannopoulos, Berkeley stuff. And I noticed more and more through my career in college, there was no theory. There was none of the topics you think you would have in a college educated sphere. It was all just here's how you do politics as a we do now, it's kind of perpetuating the system. And they kind of, when I asked about it, like, oh, it's there's no demand for it. And then you have the right wing be like, well, they're doing all this crazy stuff, so we need to cut it. Is there like kind of the cycle of anytime they go a little too far, it can be used for austerity by the right? Like, is there just a cycle?
So you didn't feel like you had any kind of like basis in a humanities education or any kind of...
It was just like, here's how you do bureaucracy, like in a political science class. And I'm like, this isn't what I want. I want the theory. And there was no theory offered anymore.
What is that? Yeah, I mean, I think that also this thing happened after the financial crisis of 2008, where I think people were a lot more willing to talk about class and Marxism. Like when I taught in the 90s, early aughts, all my students were like, oh yeah, I love Hart and Negri. Oh yeah, that's just, I love Deleuze. No, Marx, it's over. Dialectics, no. But then 2008, things really changed. But what happened was with it wasn't like people said, okay, let's study political economy and figure out what happened. There's this thing that happened. The students allegedly demanded this, and the professors responded, where everyone wanted to be more pragmatic. It was all applied knowledge because there had been $1 trillion worth of wealth had been wiped off the face of the United States ledgers, the American ledgers. So people were like, I need to get a job. And so everyone's like, oh, we're going to sell this education as a form of job getting. And so everything became applied. And the kinds of I'm going to sound like a totally old-fashioned liberal here, which is fine. The kinds of like curiosity that you could sort of participate in, the joyful aspect of learning. The administration just keeps trying to destroy that because everything, and there is a kind of generalized economic anxiety among the students too. So everyone thinks that we're like helping them by catering to this, but that's actually obviously not the case because people have a hunger for critique and curiosity, for non-reified forms of interaction that are really joyful. And I feel like that's one of the things that, I try to keep intact in my classroom. And when I write this book, like everything I write is, I hope, has something of the respect for the craft of writing, because I hate fucking bad academic writing. And when I teach, I really want to sort of keep alive this question of the joyful idea of understanding critical theory. And I don't want to say this explicitly, but to them, not on the first day of class, but everything in capitalism right now wants to destroy your joy. I mean, and the PMC's right there telling you, like, you should not have spontaneous interactions with people, with objects, with things, with other people. Let us tell you what the correct way of interacting is, or what the correct form of intersubjectivity is, and what the correct applied form of knowledge is. And that's what really kills me. That's what really kills me about the university, because, because the reason why I feel the joy of learning and can only be preserved in non-market driven spaces is one of the deepest forms of commitment to socialism that I have. Because I really feel like capitalism wants to kill any form of non-ends oriented thinking or doing.
Well, that leads perfectly into our next one. So you have 3 chapters. It's like the PMC or educated, the PMC of kids, and the PMC of sex. Kind of doing all the stages of one's life and really kind of just virtue signaling in these spheres of life, which are for so long were private and intimate and kind of like we talked about the joyful parts of life. And you basically show
ordinary too.
Right. And basically show how they're like vulgarized and basically destroyed or denigrated to this thing where it's no longer even viewed as just a natural human interaction, but like an exchange mode. It's incorporating a commodification of these personal relationships.
I also feel like there's a kind of optimization thing that's very like algorithmic, very new economy, like the whole consent thing that was pioneered at Oberlin or something, like as if you have sex with someone, you have to constantly be judging them to see if they're consenting. When you're with your baby, you have to be constantly like measuring how they're responding to you. That because you need like an app to help you do that, and in having sex, you need like a form to fill out so you can have like the optimized consensual sex. Just crazy. Like first of all, bad sex happens, and second of all, people are not like feedback loops, you know?
Well, it is, I think, one of the most charmless joys of the PMC is their quality of minimaxing everything, of like always trying to optimize for
what does minimax mean?
Minimax is an optimization algorithm for zeroing in on like, you know, the lowest cost maximum reward thing. So trying to find that absolute global optima. And along the way, all the joyful qualities of life, of friendship, companionship, intimacy. It's like, well, but I could be getting better intimacy, or I need to.
Yeah.
And it's I don't know. There's so much to disparage in all of it, except like once you start peeling back. I don't know. Sam and I used to live in San Francisco until quite recently. You just see these like, you know, tech workers huddled in their, West Elm catalog, hyper minimalist, bare walled apartments, just, you know, swiping through apps or something. It's just the most depressing existence one could imagine.
Yeah. But somehow they think that this is the vanguard of like human existence,
right?
And it's terrible. But so there's a kind of, so it doesn't work, right? That's the thing about ideology, is that it actually has to go into overdrive all the time because it can't suppress human life all the time. So it has to keep reproducing new forms. This is why they love innovation, because innovation isn't just the repetition of that minimax formula, but they love like this very reified form of innovation because they keep having to reinvent new shit to sell to younger people so that they don't recognize that this is just the old shit that everyone has been is sick of. And right now, like, I feel resistance to its depredations actually comes purely negatively. Like, it's actually like a popular refusal to go along with the PMC's program. So 2016, popular refusal of Hillary Clinton. I don't know what's going to happen in 2022, but, you know, Biden is perhaps more progressive than Obama, so that would be okay, but maybe. But there's going to be a popular refusal of its program, and that popular refusal then will feed into the PMC's contempt for working class people, for non-college educated people. But people do not. So that's my optimistic read. The other thing that's really like terrifying, though, is that working class people are the biggest consumers of self-help right now. And not only in the United States, but also in China. Like, when you're pushed to the limit of endurance, how do you motivate yourself more? It's actually like buying these self-help, self-care manuals, modules, apps, whatever, books. It started out with recordings, podcasts, and that to me is like really, really sad. But there's also different ways of just refusing this formula and this life narrative, and a lot of it is extraordinarily negative. A lot of it is extraordinarily self-destructive. I mean, we know that traumatized people are really damaged. You know, they turn against themselves, and I feel like the whole opioid addiction thing has aspects of that. And one of the things that people don't talk about with these police shootings that have been happening recently is how desperate those African American men were, or how insane their lives were, that they were in this position where they could be vulnerable to the police. And that kid, Alex Toledo, was 13. He had a gun. He was running around at 4 a.m. in the morning. Like, what is he doing? Like, what happened to his family? What social structures are around him? There's nothing. The economic depredations of capitalism have taken away all of the affectual and social economic structures around working class people and poor people. There's really like so little in the world that supports a person like Alex Toledo or a person like George Floyd. And then when they meet the gun, that's the moment that we can get excited about, because that's the victimization moment. But they were victims already.
Well, it does feel like there's been a certain boiling a frog kind of effect, right, of the stripping away of everything. But I think as socialists, perhaps, people misunderstand what we would see as the virtues of the working class. It's not, gee, the way the working class lives is so glamorous and wonderful, let's all slum it with that. It's no, a fully liberated working class is the one that would be able to conduct their lives in a way that we could all aspire to. But not this version. This version is completely castrated by capitalism.
Yeah. But I also feel like the working class revolt that Marx presaged, it was happening around him. But one of the things that happened, with the strikes, with unionization, with just worker unrest and revolt from 1848 on to 1893, all over the industrialized world, was that the workers saw themselves as a mass with radically different interests from their bosses, from their foremen, from the capitalists, right? And today, I feel like the PMC can't even understand who their bosses are. And that's what's really scary to me about this class in particular. Because they are bosses, they're trained to be bosses, but they don't understand, what their bosses are actually, or what my boss is actually saying to us, giving us all these freaking wellness initiatives and all this other stuff. Nobody wants to criticize that. Nobody wants to talk about how surveillant, the modern workplace is, or they're just afraid to even talk about that. But there's a boiling point that took place, in classic industrial working class revolt, which says, this cannot stand, and that guy is my enemy. I don't find he's morally, abhorrent to me, but more than that, he's the enemy of me and all of the people who I am in solidarity with. So I feel like that sensibility is something that we do need to revive. We need to say, we need to put labor first. And it might even be in an abstract way, but we need to put work first. Not the mini-max thing, not the computer, not the freaking self-driving car, not Elon Musk, not the entrepreneur, and put the worker and her dignity first and center. We don't even have the tools for doing that. I mean, it just breaks my heart that any kind of socialist organizing starts with difference rather than solidarity.
Well, and it's sort of fascinating, I guess, to think about the role of the PMC as the proxy or sorry, to go back. I mean, I always like to remind people, you've probably never met a capitalist. In the true economic sense. You don't actually probably interact with them. They don't go to the same parties as you do. They don't eat the same restaurants. And yet the PMC sort of functions as this proxy, this go-between that feels comfortable in both worlds, right? They can hang at the yacht club and think that that's really cool. And then they can put on this face to the workers and say, well, look, I'm also a worker. I also work for my money,
Yeah.
And
I'm sensible. I clip coupons. Yeah,
exactly. And it's such a fascinating kind of I guess think about the sort of natural selection forces upon our economic systems that became necessary because the capitalist was such an alien being. The person who's just has never worked a day in their life and controls, vast personal wealth, and you just there is no way to relate to those people. Their brains don't work the same way as anybody else's. So you had to invent this go-between.
The never having to. I think that's really important too. Is that there is a rentier class that we don't even see, and they are the ones whose money makes money,
right?
And their whole worldview, they have no relation to a working day, right? They have no relation to economic worry or anxiety. And then you have this class underneath them who basically do their bidding, who want to protect their interests, but who appear just like us. And I think that that's what's so deceiving too about someone like Warren Buffett, who like lives so modestly, but the guy could like buy you and me 5 times over. He doesn't actually have to go to work, but he represents like these sort of down-home values. He really truly is a capitalist who thinks like a capitalist all the time. And, you know, when you talk to these people, as sometimes I have been able to do, my brother, for instance, or, you know, other people I know in private equity, they're very smart. Like, you can actually talk to them and they know what they need. They need to pay people as little as possible. They need to justify the fact that people who don't make a lot of money kind of deserve not to make a lot of money. And they understand, like, and they have a whole bunch of solutions too, like, oh, you know, UBI or whatever. But they believe that markets will solve everything. Their interests are crystal clear. Once you get to the lower level of PMC and then the sort of aspirational level of PMC, younger members, I feel like they're the ones who like should have clarity, but they don't.
Right.
So another part that was really interesting in your book is how not even just the PMC is kind of being pushed, just like virtue signaling culture, but everyone's kind of being pushed it through like for the modes of like public education. You have the part about To Kill a Mockingbird and kind of this anti-working class, anti-communist messaging, which even I haven't ever thought about. Because you hear about like Orwell and like, oh, there's the Animal Farm, anti-communism. But now you have, it's Kill a Mockingbird. I wrote it wrong.
You wrote it wrong.
I know. I don't know why people always make everyone read Orwell, and I'm like so tired of this. Like, it's like, oh, Orwell, exactly.
But I want you to kind of explain like why these books are so popular among the elites and why they're pushed on us. Like, what is the underlying message? Maybe like we don't think about, but gets imposed into the culture of the youth.
I don't even know if they're genuinely popular, but I think they're so ideologically effective, and they're prestigious in a kind of like in the liberal anti-communist way. But To Kill a Mockingbird is set in, you know, the Deep South, Macomb, Alabama, and the one person who's really heroic in all this is supposedly told from the point of view of a young girl in a very racist town whose father, Atticus Finch, defends an African-American man who's been falsely accused of having molested a young white woman who's like from the white trashy family in the village, and it turns out it was her father who had assaulted her. And in that narrative, it's so compact. It's like the lawyer, the PMC member of this town is the most righteous person. His daughter, who's like, I like to think of her as the proto-feminist, is going to, you know, also go and get a college education and be enlightened like him. And African Americans are just these passive, innocent victims. And in the drama, this very, very simple allegorical drama, the white working class, white poor family is like the worst family, the most racist family in the town. There are various levels of racism in the town, and the sheriff is a little bit racist, but then he's like sees the light with Atticus. But in the sort of gradations of racism, it's the white trash family that is the most racist. They're deceptive, they're racist. And this is like the best novel of the American 20th century, and the one that all of our kids have to read and talk about and write about and everything else. And I'm like, what message is that sending us? It was also translated into like 160 languages. And then it creates this is how ideology works: prestige, allegorical narrative, reinforcement of the status quo, so that you come out of that reading that book and you don't even know that you're going to be admiring lawyers more, and you're going to be scared and repulsed by white working class people, and you're going to think of African Americans as innocent victims. They are not agents in this world. They do not play any kind of subjective role except to be like these cutout figures in this drama. And that was like a great, Pulitzer Prize winner. I mean, this kind of ideology critique, this is all I want to teach, right? And this is so not fashionable within academia.
Well,
all I want to do is teach ideology critique. And I will, and I do, like in my classes. But this was when I was coming up in the world. It was like, oh my God, that's so class reductionist. That's so that's so vulgar. Like, this is not what you were supposed to do. I feel like things took a turn for the better after 2008. I'm sorry about what happened to you in school, Sam, about
it's
your
okay.
education. It wasn't like great, it just turned a little bit, and I feel like everyone's doubled down on identity protocols now. So it's probably worse.
Well, could I ask you a little bit? I mean, I feel like one of the most visible manifestations of like the reproduction of a PMC ideology is through our media. I mean, it's that you think about, prestige television, everyone glued to Game of Thrones or whatever, and whatever it is this week, and it all sort of, it's all shot beautifully and kind of just has that like prestige TV wash on it. And yet it's all kind of pablum, right? I mean, there's an ideological content, but
there's a really significant ideological content. I forgot if I was talking about, maybe it was Bunkacast, but this is what I think about Game of Thrones and all of the prestige TV that comes out of HBO, is that it stages these scenes where people's actions, individual action, the individual acts of the elites is extraordinarily significant. Yeah. So, like, if you call your dragon now, you might lose the war. Or if you don't get, like, that little duchess from Bear Island to pledge you in the north, then, the Lannisters are going to come get you. Or let's be noble. They're incredibly noble, and the PMC are incredibly lacking in nobility. And also in our work, it's so insignificant what we do. Like, the PMC is the classic white-collar paper pushers, right? I mean, whatever you do, you don't have agent, and you are not Warren Buffett, you are not Elon Musk, you are not those scary capitalists who, as you said, Jen, are just so nameless and you can't even identify them. No, it doesn't matter who you are, and yet you have all this education. All these people tell you you're important, and you have to tell other people, like, individuals are important. And so you have these narratives in which individual decisions seem so significant, and there's so much nobility in the acts of, singular individuals. And I feel like that's the depth of escapism. Now, the only reason why I'm able to make that analysis is because I know what I need to escape to at night because I was obsessed, with these narratives too. I was like, why the hell am I obsessed with this? Why the hell am I obsessed with, like, White Walkers and dragons? Because in my everyday life, it's just like trying to do kung fu in Jell-O. It's just like trying to move in Jell-O. There's nothing that you say these things and nothing happens, and then the administration will still go ahead and say we want leadership and entrepreneurship. You can, like we did, like actually show that one of our upper administrators was about to take money from a Hindu fascist organization, but he's still making bank. Right. Because they didn't want to admit that one of their upper echelon types was about to make this mistake. So nothing makes a difference where we are. It's true. It's true.
Fundamentally,
and then you have this like prestige TV thing staging you these incredible dramas where things are so significant based on individual acts.
Well, and then you have an entire industry of selling people a kind of the quantified self, for the idea that you can make these choices in your life that will have similar significance.
That's right. Oh, everything is all about your choices for the PMC. Like your choice. So my body, my choice. Everything, like all of the language is the language of the significance of choice. But I'm telling you, like right now, it's like a terrifying, annihilation, actually, of autonomy and sovereignty to be in a large organization right now and to feel like you have so little power. And so all of the escapist stuff, all of the people the showrunners who are making this stuff, they know who their audience is. They know what, my class wants to see. It's not, it's not rocket science, but it is about like ideological content production that just produces more escapism, more reproduction of this sense of a deep sense of futility. And so the impasse that we're at now, I keep hoping that something will break it. And so I just feel like writing the book was like my small attempt to say, let's break this impasse right now. And, call me all sorts of names. I'll argue with you. But at least read the fucking book before you post.
No, do read the book.
Yes, it's so good.
Read the book. It's really good.
So kind of wrapping up, you explained how you're a PMC. Using definition, we're also PMCs, college educated. We get it. But like, how do we make others PMCs kind of return back to like a Marxist or working class first tradition? Like, how do we change the minds of this class who right now is mostly aligned with capital versus the worker?
Well, one of the things I think is to speak to people's alienation in a plain commonsensical language and to say like that's the basis from which we all share certain experiences. Because nobody's happy in this class. Nobody feels like they have meaningful work. And so you have to ask yourself like, what takes away your dignity? What strips away the meaning from your life? What's blocking you from understanding the totality that we're all trapped in? And who has the tools to help you understand that? And how do you join people in a joyful way in criticizing what they see and not creating like new forms of etiquette to like gingerly tiptoe around others? How do you embrace the suffering and struggle of other people? Recognize always the struggle of other people. I think that's one of the things that I always, hold on to, is that you have to respect the struggles of every worker, and especially the working class. And if you think that things are easy and frictionless, that's because you've bought into some kind of mini-max PMC, like algorithmically adjusted reality. And that's not reality,
Well, Professor Catherine Liu, thank you so much for joining us. The book is Virtue Hoarders, The Case Against Professional Managerial Class. Available where all good books are sold, I should damn well hope. And I'm going to stress one more time. Honestly, if you are the sort of person who's like, gee, I really wish I was keeping up with reading about politics in a way, this is the book for you. I swear it is. This will be the one you will just not be able to put down. Anything else you're working on or you'd like to plug or tell people about?
I'm working on another book right now on trauma as a form of communication in the digital age. Oh. And it'll be about the reification of the language of trauma in the politics today and how it actually is a block against political mobilization.
Well, I do hope you've seen Mila's Twinkrev article on the subject.
No. Oh, yes,
yeah,
I have. That was brilliant. That was totally
wonderful.
Brilliant. Totally brilliant.
I'm going to be looking forward to the next book. And you're currently a little less on Twitter after old Dougie boy sent his mob, right?
Yeah, but I'm still there. I'm at Bureaucrat Liu, and it's locked. But if you seem like a reasonable person and a person of the real left, of the true left, I will let you join. I will let you follow me, and I will follow you. All right.
Catherine, thank you so much. We've really appreciated it.
Thanks so much. This was great.